The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Francis Donald here, and welcome to this 8th webinar on the Secret Doctrine by Helena Blavatsky. This and all subsequent sessions will be available on makara.us under the subtitle Open Webinars. So we begin each webinar by tracing HPB and Colonel Olcott's travels as described in the Colonel's old diary leaves. Last month we found HPB and the Colonel traveling from the palace complex of Suraj Mul to Agra. This month we find them staying at the home of A.P. Sinnett, author of the well-known theosophical work Esoteric Buddhism, which is still in publication. It's a great book, actually. Sinnett relates in his book, The Occult World, that, quote, on the first occasion of my making Madame Blavatsky's acquaintance, she became a guest at my home in Allahabad and remained there for 6 weeks. So the following takes place during that stay. And so could we start off with a reader, please, for this section?
Anne, can you read that for us, please?
The second subsequent morning, we reached Allahabad and were met by Mr. Sinnett at the station with his barouche and pair, a fourth-wheel horse-drawn carriage, coachman, and 2 footmen and handsome liveries. As a sample of the just disbelief of Western scientists, I give the following. We had to dine with us one evening a professor of physical science in the local university, a man of wide renown and charming companion. He discussed with HPB her theory of the raps and finally asked her to produce some. She did so in various parts of the room. On the floor, the walls, the glasses of the hanging pictures, on a newspaper held out to her by Mr. Sinnett or the professor, I forgot which. And on the professor's hand, she sometimes not even touching the surface to be wrapped upon, but as it were, throwing a current of physic force against it from a distance. Sinnett then placed a large glass clock shade on the rug before the fire, and she worked on that. Finally, to give the best possible proof that the raps were mechanical vibrations made by the intended or unintentional pushing of the medium's finger on the spot, I suggested a test which was accepted. I got HPB to place her fingertips against one of the glasses on a door that gave up on the veranda, took the lamp outside with the professor, and held it so that the flesh of her fingers was highly illuminated. And she then caused as many raps as he successively called for. The fingers did not change place a hair's breadth, nor her muscles contract, but we could see the nerves quivering before each rap, as through some fine current of nerve force were thrilling through them. The professor had nothing to say, save that it was all very strange. It seems to us, her friends, as if a more conclusive proof of her good faith could not have been demanded. But the professor subsequently declared her a trickster. Poor thing. That was all she got for trying to give a scientific man the fact on which to begin the serious study of psychology. I think the bitter experience so disgusted her as to make her even less willing than previously to take the least trouble to convince that class of observers.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Some evenings later, while he was still staying with his tenants, they entertained a number of guests, including a Dr. Thibault from a nearby college of Sanskrit pundits. And I'm going to read this one. A return visit paid by, oh, wait a minute. Let's see. Yeah, this woman, Maji, is a renowned saint of from the area, and so she met her in this. You see an illustration of her up in the left-hand corner. So anyway, a return visit paid by Mahaji to HPB the next morning caused surprise, as we were told. It was a most unusual thing for her to call upon anybody save her guru, and upon a European, never. I held to my first belief that she was an adept for many years. At the time of her call, she was a complete stranger to us. And so far as we knew, nobody had explained to her who we were, save we ourselves when we called at her ashram. Yet, she freely told Mrs. Gordon Damodar and myself, in HPB's absence, a marvelous tale about her. She said that HPB's body was occupied by a yogi. You can see that illustrated there on the left, who was working insofar as he could for the spread of Eastern philosophy. It was the third body he had so used, and his total age in the three bodies was about 150 years. Speaking always as a Vedantin, Maaji would allude to herself as this body. Laying a hand on her knee or on the other arm, she would say, this body's, family, studies, residence, pilgrimages, or whatnot. I finally asked her why she spoke so and who she was. She said that the body we saw was entered at its 7th year by a sannyasi and had been occupied by him ever since. He had not completed his study of yoga, and so, through her, became reborn. The, quote, she, unquote, therefore was in reality a he overlaid with a female body, a parallel case to HPV's. All right. And for my own particular reasons, I would like to have Scott read this one, if that's, if you would, please, Scott.
Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Great. The talk was upon the subject of yoga. Madame Blavatsky, said Dr. Thibault in his strong German accent, these pandits tell me that undoubtedly in the ancient times there were yogis who had actually developed the siddhis described in the Shastras, that they could do wonderful things. For instance, they could make fall in a room like this a shower of roses. But now nobody can do that. I see him now, as he sat on a sofa to HPB's right, with his frock coat buttoned to his chin, his intellectual pale face as solemn as though he were pronouncing a funeral oration, and his hair standing up like spikes all over his head. He had no sooner pronounced the last word than HPB started up in her chair, looked scornfully at him, and burst out, "Oh, they say that, do they? They say no one can do it now. Well, I'll show them." And you may tell them from me that if the modern Hindus were less in love with their vices and more like their ancestors, they would not have to make such a humiliating confession, nor get an old Western hippopotamus of a woman to prove the truth of their Shastras. Then, setting her lips together and muttering something, she swept her right hand through the air with an imperious gesture, and bang! On the heads of the company fell about a dozen roses. As soon as the momentary shock of surprise was over, there was a scramble for the roses. But Thibaut sat as straight as a post and seemed to be casting it up, pro and con, in his mind. Then the discussion proceeded with renewed vivacity. The Sankhya was the topic, and Thibaut put many searching questions to HPB, which he answered so satisfactorily that the doctor said that neither Max Muller nor any other Orientalist had made so clear to him the real meaning of the Sankhya philosophy as she had, and he thanked her very much. Towards the end of the evening, in a pause in the conversation, he turned to HPB and, always keeping his eyes fixed towards the floor according to his habit, said that as he has not been so fortunate as to get one of the roses that had so unexpectedly fallen, might he be favored with one as a souvenir of this very delightful evening. His secret thought probably was that if the first floral rain had been a trick, she would not be ready for a second, if taken unawares. "Oh yes, certainly," she said, "as many as you like." And making another of her sweeping gestures, down fell another shower of flowers, one rose actually hitting the doctor on the top of his head and bouncing into his lap as he sat bolt upright. I happened to be looking at him at that moment and saw the whole incident. Its effect was so funny as to set me off into a fit of laughter. He gave a little, very slight start, opened and shut his eyes twice, and then taking a rose and looking down at it, said with an imperturbable solemnity, "The weight multiplied by the velocity proves that it must have come from a great distance." There spoke the hard savant, the unimaginative scholar, who reduces all life to an equation and expresses all emotions by algebraic signs.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, now let's pick up where we left off in the poem. Actually, we'll back up a paragraph or so. You may remember that we've just finished examining an occult catechism, which ended with the statement, "Hot breath is the father who devours the progeny of the many-faced element, heterogeneous, and leaves the single-faced ones, homogeneous. Cool breath is the mother who conceives, forms, brings forth, and receives them back into her bosom to reform them at the dawn of the day of Brahma, or Manvantara." So during our last webinar, this soul commentary led us into a discussion about super sensuous substance. HPB then states, and let's go ahead and choose a reader for this.
Okay. Michael, can you read for us, please?
Sure. Occult science recognizes 7 cosmical elements, 4 entirely physical, and the 5th, ether, semi-material, as it will become visible in the air towards the end of our 4th round, to reign supreme over the others during the whole of the 5th. The remaining 2 are as yet absolutely beyond the range of human perception. These latter will, however, appear as presentments during the 6th and 7th races of this round, and will become known in the 6th and 7th rounds, respectively.
Thanks, Michael. So it's kind of a peculiar paragraph to follow right on the heels of this old commentary. And it took me a bit to puzzle out, what she was up to with this. Why do these various levels of ether what do they have to do with the dissolution of a manvantara? And I finally realized that they will increasingly come to more closely resemble the state of homogeneous substance that characterizes the beginning and end of each manvantara. So as we move towards the vision of these higher levels of substance, we're actually moving towards this time. So if we reference this chart found in a treatise on cosmic fire, we see that HPP's 7 cosmical elements are analogous to the matter found on the 7 cosmic planes. But because HPP states that 4 of these elements are entirely physical, the 4th or lowest ether was accepted as physical substance by many scientists in HPP's time, and that the lowest ether will be, quote, visible in the air, unquote, at the end of the 4th round. She seems to be referring not to cosmical elements, but to the purely physical elements. In fact, we know through DK's teachings that these 7 elements actually exist on 3 levels, including the systemic or planetary level. The importance of etheric vision coming to humanity later in this, the 4th round, lies in the fact that at least part of our energy bodies will become visible, which will revolutionize everything: medicine, psychology, education, our views on death, and even daily human interaction. I mean, just imagine the impact on people's lives when they can see each other's energy bodies, including the level of activity in each other's chakras. I mean, the whole concept of appearances will take on a whole new meaning and a much deeper significance. Okay, let's take a look at the footnote. Can we get a reader for this?
Helen, can you read for us, please?
It is curious to notice how, in the evolutionary cycles of ideas, ancient thought seems to be reflected in modern speculation. Had Mr. Herbert Spencer read and studied ancient Hindu philosophers when he wrote a certain passage in his First Principles, or is it an independent flash of inner perception that made him say half correctly, half incorrectly, motion as well as matter being fixed in quantity, it would seem that the change in the distribution of matter which motion effects, coming to a limit in whichever direction it is carried, the indestructible motion thereupon necessitates a reverse distribution. Apparently, the universally coexistent forces of attraction and repulsion necessitate rhythm in the totality of its changes, produce now an immeasurable period during which the attracting forces predominating cause universal concentration, and then an immeasurable period during which the repulsive forces predominating cause universal diffusion, alternate eras of evolution and dissolution.
Thank you. So, you know, the interesting thing about this is a parallel development of these ancient wisdom teaching tenets that was coming through mainstream 19th century philosophy. So there's, you know, it becomes of note for that reason. You know, where you see the question marks, of course, is where Spencer's ideas differs from the ancient wisdom teachings. But he was, as she suggests, you know, had he just read some Hindu teachings, or, you know, was this his own intuition at work, you know, to recognize this quality of motion as inherent to the absolute. Okay, let's get back to the text. These 7 elements with their numberless sub-elements, far more numerous than those known to science, are simply conditional modifications and aspects of the one and only element. Very important concept. It's the 7 from the one. This latter, this one and only element, is not ether, not even akasha, but the source of these. Okay, akasha, you may remember, is described as the subtle, supersensuous spiritual essence which pervades all space, right? So, of course, science no longer accepts the existence of ether at all, as they at least conditionally did during HPB's lifetime. Here referenced, the 7 elements could be either systemic or cosmic, depending on the level of manvantara in manifestation. At any rate, with this statement, HPB finally explains the last part of the esoteric catechism. Hot breath is the father who devours the progeny of the many-faced element, heterogeneous. That would be the 7 levels of substance in all its diversity, and leaves the single-faced ones, homogeneous element. Here described is the source of akasha, sometimes called mula prakriti. So anybody have any thoughts or comments about these 7 elements and their relationship to the coming and going of the manvantara, and how we gradually see, as we progress through the root lives, more and more of these elements. You know, Dwal Kul says that later in the 4th round, that we will start seeing etherically. So, any thoughts or questions about this?
I don't see any hands up or questions yet.
Okay, that's fine.
I do now. Hold on. Go ahead, please, Scott.
Yeah, can we go back to that slide?
Yeah, sure. So, hang on a second. There we go.
Just wondering, the 5th cosmic element, would you be thinking that would correspond with the cosmic mental plane as well?
I think so. Yeah, it couldn't not correspond.
Right.
It's also we're going to be coming to a slide in a little bit that correlates these 5s, but it's this source of cosmic ideation,
Right.
or is strongly linked to it. It's more causal than the substantive aspect of the 5th plane, but it is it's coexistent with it. Yeah.
And appropriate with the causal body of the solar logos.
There it is. Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Which is nonetheless a substantive structure. So yeah. Any other thoughts, comments about this?
I don't see any.
Okay, that's good. I think we have some idea of this. So can we get a reader for this about Isaac Newton?
Carrie, can you read that for us, please?
The 5th element, now advocated quite freely by science, is not the ether hypothesized by Sir Isaac Newton, although he calls it by that name, having associated it in his mind probably with the ether, father, mother of antiquity. As Newton intuitionally says, nature is a perpetual circulatory worker, generating fluids out of solids, fixed things out of volatile, and volatile out of fixed, subtile out of gross, and gross out of subtile. Thus, perhaps, may all things be originated from ether.
Thank you, Carrie. So, by the way, I looked up this Hypoth, 1675. I thought it might be it's a quote from a book he wrote, but I could find no book with that in it. But he did make a number of hypotheses. That was a favorite concept for Newton. And so it might come from a collection of hypotheses that I couldn't find. Anyway, on to the footnote for this. I'll read what diatherminus, and esoterically, it means the property of some fluids that allow rays of light through them without being heated, thereby suggesting that it is other than what we know as physical plane. So with that definition, can we get a reader for this footnote?
Can you read that for us, please, Yvonne?
Whatever the views of physical science upon the subject, occult science has been teaching for ages that Akasha, of which ether is the grossest form, the fifth universal cosmic principle, to which corresponds and from which proceeds human manas, is cosmically a radiant, cool, diaphanous plastic matter, creative in its physical nature, correlative in its grossest aspects and portions, immutable in its higher principles. In the former condition, it is called the subroot, and in conjunction with radiant heat, it recalls dead worlds to life. In its higher aspect, it is the soul of the world. In its lower, the destroyer.
Okay. So this ties together many of the concepts we've been considering. The fifth universal cosmic principle is one, the source of Akasha, which is, you could even say one with this Akasha, which is immutable, creative, and correlated. Two, the subroot associated with the mother aspect, note its cool radiance. Three, the soul of the world, capable of bringing worlds to life. And four, the source of human manas. So given this list, does anybody have any thoughts or ideas or questions about this idea of the fifth cosmic principle? It takes a minute to formulate these questions. So,
Yeah, I
any
don't
thoughts?
see any hands and I don't see any questions. So
It's a difficult and elusive concept, and it actually is going to be unfolded as we keep going. We get some clear understanding of how it relates, for instance, to the absolute in the paragraphs coming. So onward. Let's get a reader for this, please.
Eva, can you read for us, please?
Sure. Okay. You know what? I need glasses. Just hang on. The reader has to bear in mind that the stanzas given treat only of the cosmogony of our planetary system and what is visible around it after a solar pralaya. The secret teachings with regard to the evolution of the universal cosmos cannot be given, since they could not be understood by the highest minds in this age, and there seem to be very few initiates, even among the greatest, who are allowed to speculate upon this subject. Moreover, the teachers say openly that not even the highest Dhyani Chohans have ever penetrated the mysteries beyond those boundaries that separate the milliards of solar systems from the central sun, as it is called. Therefore, that which is given relates only to our visible cosmos after a night of Brahma, or as you say, Brahma.
Yeah, so basically no one can see into the pralaya, into this causal level. And, DK often has said that the sight of even a master of wisdom is quite limited when you direct that gaze towards the cosmos. Hence the name, the one about whom not may be said, right? It's just, it's beyond, it's so completely beyond the consciousness of human awareness, or even the level of a high initiate, that it can't be described or discussed. So, let alone these idea of cosmic pralayas, where the introduction of what's described as numberless universes occurs, and where these old commentaries came from to describe this is a great mystery. But that's what the Secret Doctrine is about. So, okay, thank you, Eva. All right. So now we move into a new subsection of the Proem. So could we get a reader for this one, please?
Karen, can you read that for us, please?
Oh, I wish that I could. On Wednesday, I'm having cataract surgery, and hopefully next month I will be able to read.
Okay, Helen. Good luck on that. I hope it goes without a flaw. Yeah. Someone else?
Gabriella, can you read that for us, please? Well, I'm not hearing her, so let's go down to Leah, can you read that for us, please?
Before the reader proceeds to the consideration of the stanzas from the Book of Dzyan, which form the basis of the present work, it is absolutely necessary that he should be made acquainted with a few fundamental conceptions which underlie and pervade the entire system of thought to which his attention is invited. These basic ideas are few in number, and on their clear apprehension depends the understanding of all that follows. Therefore, no apology is required for asking the reader to make himself familiar with them first, before entering on the perusal of the work itself.
Okay, so this is the kind of introduction within an introduction. We're right at about the halfway point, just past the halfway point of the Proem. And so she's now making all references relevant to the stanzas of Dzyan themselves. So it would be, in that sense, we're entering a new section. However, in doing that, we also do a little bit of review work. So it starts with this statement. So could we get a reader for this, please? It's going to seem very familiar because we've been here before, but it's said in a different way.
Clesia,
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. The Secret Doctrine establishes three fundamental propositions. A, an omnipresent, eternal, boundless, and immutable principle on which all speculation is impossible, since it transcends the power of human conception and could only be dwarfed by any human expression or similitude. It is beyond the range and reach of thought, in the words of Mandukaya, unthinkable and unspeakable.
Thank you. So, please, yeah. So, a lot of the Proem to this point has explored this first of these fundamental propositions. Despite the fact, I might add, that, quote, all speculation is impossible since it transcends the power of human conception. In fact, you'll find this first proposition something of a review, but with a further elucidation of transcendent motion, the great breath, and their relationship to what HPB calls the pure noumenon of thought. She gets into that a little more deeply. So this next section explores this this first of three fundamental propositions, this boundless, immutable principle. Okay. Can we get a reader for this paragraph, please?
Susan, can you read that for us, please?
Sure. To render these ideas clearer to the general reader, let him set out with the postulate that there is one absolute reality which antecedes all manifested conditioned being. This infinite and eternal cause, dimly formulated in the unconscious and the unknowable of current European philosophy, is the rootless root of all that was, is, or ever shall be. It is the course devoid of all attributes and is essentially without any relation to the manifested finite being. It is beingness rather than being, in Sanskrit, sat. It is beyond all thought or speculation.
Okay, this Sanskrit term sat deserves some attention for a moment. Sat is often connected with the two terms chit and ananda, together expressed as one word, sat chit ananda, thus underscoring the inherent unity of sat's three component parts or concepts. In Sanskrit, sat means pure being, chit means noumenal consciousness, and ananda means bliss. Together, at least in Hindu thought, they signify the inherent state of the absolute. Any questions about this concept? You can see that they're being revealed by the hand of some god sculpture. Those are the fingers, you know, and it's like the open hand of revelation. So any thoughts about Sat, Chit, or Ananda? They are, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I don't see any hands up or comments.
Yeah, as the one always manifests at first as three, you could say that these are the three qualities. Now this is more in the nature of traditional Hindu esoteric thought, but it has a direct correlation to the ancient wisdom teachers.
Eva's got her hand up.
Yeah, Eva.
You're self-muted.
Okay, so
there you go.
Now that I've been talking to myself, just like you just said, Francis, it definitely correlates to the three principles or the three main of the Trinity of God that we all so much know through our ageless wisdom, whether it's spirit, soul, and appearance, or spirit, quality, and appearance or form. These are all different interrelated words that, you know, are used, Kether, Chokhmah, and Bina in the Kabbalah. So, you know, we know it as the Father, the Son,
Right.
Holy Spirit. They're all the same things. They're just different words that are used. So this being Sanskrit, it's become so commonplace for us to use Satchit Ananda, and anyone that does any of these meditations that, you know, have stems from the East. So it's oftentimes used. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it does relate to these three. Interesting though, I mean, Sat as the father aspect, you know, the absolute, is easy to see in the sense of it's the source of life, the pure beingness. And in the thought principle, we have the monastic, or the second principle, the realm of the soul, as an analogy. Though at this level, it precedes, it's causal to that. But interesting with the ananda, and which is described as bliss, how does that relate to the physical realm, or to the form realm, I should say? How do you see that? And I'm not just directing this to Eva, but to everyone, because there's no question that it is, in fact, related to that. But how does the concept of ananda as bliss relate to the realm of form? Any ideas about that?
Yes, actually, it's Eva.
Okay.
Is it any different than the Shakti that people get on a physical level when the Holy Ghost or the Holy Spirit all of a sudden infuses into the form? It's still all that same third aspect. And that's a blissful state. I mean,
I think you put your finger right on it. You see the Hindu sculptures of the Shakti wrapped around the immovable form of the god, or the Lord, or in this case it would be Sat, whether it be Shiva, Vishnu, or Brahma, because they all have their Shaktis. And I think that's exactly right, Eva, that they're describing the state imparted on the realm of form, rather than, calling it the realm of form, which, pitches it to that higher octave. Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Yeah. Okay, so
Michael.
Yeah.
Michael has his hand up. Go ahead, please.
Yes, in the definition itself, it refers to sensual pleasure, which to me, it's obvious physical.
Exactly. Right. You see, we've been focusing on the highest definitions of these three terms, but they're also used to mean these other terms that we didn't read aloud. For instance, Sat can just mean wise, beautiful, venerable, like a master has a quality of Sat, right? And it's easy to see the connection to the absolute in that, right? So yeah, good point, Michael.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Susan has her hand up.
Yes, Susan.
I was just thinking to say that I think, as above, so below, I think when we know our true self, we have the joy and the freedom, or the freedom that brings the joy of knowing who and what we really are, and that we can have that in the physical realm. So I would call that ananda.
Yeah, I definitely.
No different than what anyone else has said, but a little less esoteric.
Also,
and a little less sensual.
Yeah, it's the evolutionary experience. In the evolutionary, ananda comes first, right? There's the bliss of ananda that leads to an understanding, which is the cheap aspect, which takes us to the threshold of Sat, so it's, ananda is our link, to these higher qualities. Thanks.
Right.
I'm sorry?
And our birthright. But we have to look into that.
Yeah, birthright, maybe not in this incarnation, but in all our incarnations together, considered as a birthright.
Oh gosh, I don't know why you'd put it that way. I would certainly say it's our right at any moment, as soon as we have the ability to perceive it.
Well, one contains the other. What I was actually doing was not denying that, but expanding it to mean that it is our continuous given birthright through the incarnations. Yeah.
All that we could ever be.
Yeah, and will be. Yeah.
And already are.
If we only knew it, right? Okay, so could we get a reader for this next commentary on? So we're back to Sat again, and I just stepped aside on my own to try to fill out that idea a little bit. So now we're back to the Secret Doctrine. Can we get a reader, please?
Antoinette, can you read that for us, please?
Yes. This beingness is symbolized in the Secret Doctrine under two aspects. On the one hand, absolute abstract space, representing bare subjectivity, the one thing which no human mind can either exclude from any conception or conceive of by itself. On the other, absolute abstract motion, representing unconditioned consciousness. Even our Western thinkers have shown that consciousness is unconceivable to us apart from change, and motion best symbolizes change, its essential characteristic. This latter aspect of the one reality is also symbolized by the term the great breath, a symbol sufficiently graphic to need no further elucidation. Thus then, the first fundamental axiom of the Secret Doctrine is this metaphysical one absolute beingness, symbolized by finite intelligence as the theological Trinity.
Any thoughts about this? This is quite a paragraph. Gives us a little more insight into what's called the great breath, linking it to the whole concept of change. So any ideas about this? What jumps out from this paragraph for you? Anyone? Well, the idea of yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Suzanne has a
Good.
comment. Oops, there you go.
I think abstract motion is probably also known as Fohat, yes?
It's Fohat is actually what they're so correlated. It's Fohat connects divine or cosmic ideation with cosmic substance. It's the reason, it's the means by which we are able to inhabit a physical form and still be conscious. It's the linking electrical phenomena between the non-substantive realm of ideation and the physical form. And of course, that is what institutes change, right? So they're, even though they're not identical concepts, they're strongly interrelated. Now, and we'll be getting to Fohat. She introduces the concept of Fohat in a few paragraphs. So we're going to be getting there soon.
Michael, go ahead, you're self-muted.
Okay, this is dealing with two aspects, and both these aspects are abstract rather than concrete. So they have not yet taken form of any kind, in my interpretation. There's space on one hand, which is not taken form. There's motion, which is not taken form.
Right. That's a very important point. These are, the great breath is the only aspect of the one absolute. This is not a step into the realm of form. This pre-exists this pre-exists Manvantaric existence, right? This is what she's describing here, as you mentioned, is the inherent qualities of beingness. So yeah, right on, Michael.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's the first axiom of the Secret Doctrine, right? Any other thoughts about this paragraph? Right.
I don't see any more hands or comments.
Okay, we have, we've talked a lot about this, but because it's nothing we can directly experience, it's sort of, it's like an itch you can't quite get to. Did I really just say that? Oh well. It just stays with you, right? Because you can never really wrap your mind around this idea of the absolute, the causeless cause, right? It's just pre-existent. So, one of the most fascinating ideas in the Proem is this concept of the great breath. Why choose this metaphor for what HPB describes elsewhere as eternal, ceaseless motion? Now, I'll throw this out. Why would the ancient wisdom teachings, because this isn't just HPB, this is in the stanzas themselves, this concept of the great breath, which I think is more direct than a metaphor, and yet nonetheless from our perspective it would seem to be a metaphor, right? Any ideas why, or what is it about this idea of the great breath? What is it about that it could be the one quality or attribute of the absolute immutable being? Anybody have a thought? Interesting, Michael took exception to this. Michael Robbins took exception to this, and for good reasons. He says, it's how can there be an attribute? How can there be an emotion to this this beingness when it is already everything? How can there be any kind of like point A to B motion? And it's a good point, but there's other ways of looking at this concept of motion. The idea of motion itself there can be causal levels to motion itself, and I think that's what we're looking at here. So, any ideas? Okay, I had a couple. Two ideas come to mind. Number one, breath is made up of an in and out breath, which together make up one cycle. So at this level we'd be talking about the potential for cycles to exist, the nature of the cycle is inherent to the absolute. And the other idea is that breath transmits and is the evidence of life. Breath emanates from the source, a life source, and so it's the transmittative agent, and so that could have something to do with the choice of this metaphor. Any other ideas?
Francis.
Oh, hey, Michael.
I got it wrong. I thought you were starting at 8 o'clock. Excuse me.
Oh.
Well, I think this is a real problem, because with absolute homogeneity, there is no relativity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'd like to know how one conceives of any type of motion except in relation. Okay, I'm sorry, I may have been muted there for a minute. I'd like to know how anyone conceives of any type of motion except if relativity is possible. Now, I do think the great breath is an alternation between absoluteness and absolute infinitude. This is my guess. I'm working on these things, but from a different language. And of course, it's really important when a person works on these matters that they do not allow themselves to be swayed by powerful thoughts which have come from other thinkers. They've really got to derive this themselves. So it seems to me there is an alternation going on between absolute homogeneity and what I would call absolute infinitude. And I think basically that is the prototype of the great breath. And there's just so many mysteries here that it's really, really hard. You know, everybody's got their own language, and I'm sure HPB being a, kind of initiate of the fourth degree, when people tend to really get into this kind of stuff, I mean, like Krishnamurti, same thing. She did the best she could with the language that was available to her, and she was a profound thinker. But there are some stumbling blocks here. It seems the great breath is the one perpetual motion. That's how I see it. And it's sort of between, in another way of looking at it, it's the alternation between finitude and absolute infinitude. So we might look at the absolute as, somehow being absolute infinitude, and then as a cosmos, as being, however vast, some kind of finitude. And there's just this forever perpetual motion, and who knows where it began or how it began. It's a stumbling block to understand without multiplicity and without division how it can exist.
Yeah.
Anyway, that, I'm maybe just repeating what I said before, but that's my take on it. And in a couple of years when I have this ready, I'll do my best to explain what I think. Okay, so thank you, Francis.
Well, to stand in your corner for a moment, even if you look at it as being in a causal relationship to motion, like for instance the potential of motion, like motion in potential, you still have stepped out of the purely homogeneous. And so, and it is a puzzler, because it's also, I have a chart coming up that describes all the different names for this quality that is given the name of cosmic ideation, infinite perpetual motion, and the great breath. It's, these are all trying to get at this same core idea. And that may help a little bit, but no matter, even so, we're stuck with this idea of you have this absolute homogeneity, or what was it, going back to this what the father aspect through the fiery breath reduces everything to homogeneity. That's how the end of the Manvadara takes place, right? And so so in that would seem to also cease even the potential for cyclic and involutionary and evolutionary motion. But there is nothing, and I've combed this Proem to get a further explanatory insight. So hopefully it will just come to us, some reconciliation is all I can say might come to us about this idea. Otherwise, we'll just have to hold it.
I just see it as, in my present limited thought, severely limited, but I see it as three things: absolute homogeneity, which cannot observe itself, and in which even the attributes of consciousness and intelligence, et cetera, do not really exist. The one and only zero, which is absolute potential and absolute fulfillment at the same time, exists. Then the second factor for me is absolute infinitude in which all the things that we talk about, including the great breath and motion and all the rest of it, exists in a sort of a post-prolaic world, pre-prolaic or pre-universal or a post-prolaic, you know. And then the third thing is the finite extrusion of absolute infinitude chosen by God knows what, maybe the absolute deity, whatever. And that's our universe. At present, I'm playing with these three things.
Yeah. And they're right down with the, idea of this symbol, which is the absolute beingness. And then when you get the point, you're not in manifestation at all. You have entered the realm of cause. From the homogeneity, because the first logos is just a causal being. It's but it's the one as opposed to the homogeneity. I mean, that's how I understand it.
So
the difference.
Yes.
Yeah, the difference between 0 and 1, exactly. So how the great breath is a part of this beingness, in HPB's mind, and how, and another question is how much of this is a direct reading of the real ancient wisdom teachings, and I think we're going to find out, because in the by reading this 25 pages of pure stanza, we're going to, which is what's coming for us. And then all her 400 pages of commentary on that, there's going to be more clues as to this.
Thank you.
It's almost nice not to have it all figured out, isn't it?
We are.
Okay, wait.
Yeah. Okay.
Before you move on, Susan has her hand up. Go ahead, please, Susan. You're self-muted.
So I've never talked in this this class before. I hope I'm not bothering anybody to be talking so much today. But
we love it, Susan. You are absolutely invited.
You're clearly, all of you, more educated than I am on all this stuff. So, but it does bring to mind when you talk about motion and and homogeneity. Where can there be motion if it's all homogeneous? It makes me think about just conscious awareness or awareness. And if the mind, to bring it to the mundane level, if the mind is perfectly still, it's still alive, right? When it's not thinking, when it's not moving, when it's absolutely, utterly still, there's still an aliveness there. And it seems to me like that could describe the motionless motion.
Yeah, and certainly even at this, what Michael's describing is the infinitude, that would be a causal level where this motion in its, you could say before it demonstrates its motion, but in its causal aspect exists. And I think
there's an aliveness there.
Yeah, it's permeated by the livingness, the which you could call the point at the center, which is the the living source of itself, right? So and you basically, what you've done in your description is describe the microcosm of the macrocosm that we've been looking at, right? That's how it looks in the developed human being, for instance. So that's appreciated. Thank you, Susan.
And the great breath, this is not, you're talking about beyond Manvantara and Pralaya. It's not, the great breath is not talking about Manvantara and Pralaya, but something primordial.
It's certainly primordial, no matter where you place it. And it would be, in my understanding, it is the agent of the Manvantara and exists within the infinitude as potential. So it is the ever-present cyclic potential of manifestation, but it's not manifestation itself at all. It's just that potential. But as Michael rightly points out, how can you have even that in a purely homogeneous state of beingness? And that remains the
But maybe we're trying to make something dual that's pre-dual, you know? I mean,
exactly. That's exactly right.
If it's abstract motion, then it's not motion, but the capability of motion, awaiting for the spark or awaiting for Fohad or something like that to
So
ignite.
it would seem. But we have to expand our understanding of motion here. We're not talking about point A to point B motion. For instance, change can be seen as motion, right? In fact, in a quote coming up, this is brought out, that the fact or the ability or the causal reality that allows for change can be seen as motion. So, you know, it's sometimes helpful to get off of the idea of something moving through space.
So why wouldn't we call that aliveness? Aliveness, awareness, awakeness.
Exactly. Yeah, just calling that itself emotion, the fact of aliveness. Well, because aliveness could be seen as something, as a further step away from beingness. But you know what we're doing? We're juggling a level of reality that we have absolutely no way of having a direct experience of, right? We're all drawn towards it. But in trying to divide this particular hair philosophically, we're really, we don't have the tools to do it because we don't have the intuition awakened to the level that we can understand that. However, that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. It just, we need to be aware of the level of reality that we're actually working with here.
I think the word beingness works perfectly, actually, to all that I'm trying to point to, and I guess I'm just not understanding why it's a problem. I guess I'm thinking I must not be seeing something that you're trying to point out because it doesn't feel like a problem to me.
Well, okay. If I can just suggest that you hold it for a bit, and because what we're going to be doing in the next, say, 15 minutes is, I think, going to at least help in this direction. Okay, so let's do that. Let's move on.
I have several comments.
Several comments. Okay, that's great. Bring them on. Let's go for it.
Okay, now I'm sorry, Gabriella, I'm going to butcher some of this. I'm sorry. She says, may be related from Indian and Tibetan Buddhism, and this has 1,000 years of elaboration and thinking generated from it. And then she has a quote here. Two truths, Sanskrit for Devasatiya, sorry, I can't do the Sanskrit, I'm sorry. Anyway, everything has an absolute aspect or absolute truth and a relative aspect or relative truth. The absolute or ultimate is the inherent nature of everything, how things really are. The conventional or relative is how things appear. In the teachings, these are known as the two truths, but they are not to be understood as two separate dimensions, rather as two aspects of a single reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that last phrase addresses this issue. Yeah. And, you know, also, but even, it's a slightly different issue that it addresses, though, because, you know, the ancient wisdom teachings also state that the manifested realm is part of the realm of beingness or the absolute. It is not outside it at all. It is intrinsic to it, but it is only existent during the time of Manvantara. So maybe we have a clue there, in that if it's intrinsic to it, if it's not other than it, it must be in it even when it's not manifesting. It doesn't, gosh, language really, I was going to say it doesn't entirely disappear, but see, that doesn't do it justice. It just, if it is ever one with it, then it must be in potential always with it. And I think that's, you know, another way of saying what, Gabrielle, what you just wrote. This is, you know, this is common doctrine, that the realm of the manifested is one with the life aspect, right? But, you know, we don't have issue with that. It's really, what is the nature of the absolute, what's called absolute abstract space, during periods of, during non-pralaya periods. So thank you for that, Gabrielle. Let's go to the next
Okay,
comment.
this one is from Anne Veronica, and she says we are three-dimensional. What we perceive as motion on our three dimension, it might be without motion on more dimensions.
Yeah, well, I would just say to that the nature of motion is going to change every time you add a dimension. You know, when you go into a fourth dimensional realm, well, just for example, something we can all understand, you know, we can apply motion to time, which may or may not be the fourth dimension, but we all understand motion in terms of time, moving forward through time, right? And yet it's not the motion of the three dimensions. Well, that's a very finite example compared to what happens, say, in the fifth dimension to motion, and beyond that. I don't remember how many dimensions that DK describes, but he alludes to quite a number. And that is all still not addressing this final dimensionless realm. You could call pre-dimensional realm of the absolute. So thank you for that. You know, it all adds to our understanding, doesn't it? So any more comments?
Nope, that's it.
That's it. Okay, I'd like to move on. So let's go to the next statement in the text. Can we get a reader for this?
Lona, can you read for us, please?
Are you self-muted, Lona?
It may, however, assist the student if a few further explanations are given here. Herbert Spencer has of late so far modified his agnosticism as to assert that the nature of the first cause, which the occultist more logically derives from the causeless cause, the eternal and the unknowable, may be essentially the same as that of the consciousness which wells up within us. In short, that the impersonal reality pervading the cosmos is the pure noumenon of thought. This advance on his part brings him very near to the esoteric and Vedantan tenet. The first presupposes necessarily something which is the first brought forth, the first in time, space, and rank, and therefore finite and conditioned, the first Proem.
Thank you, Lona. So HPB, though in the main championing Spencer's idea here, points out that what he calls the first cause should more correctly be termed the causeless cause. In this paragraph, HPB, through Herbert Spencer, adds a new descriptor to the categories he names the Great Breath. That is the pure noumenon of thought. Of course, you know, we're always going to be restricted by language. Noumenon is very definitely and directly connected with the concept of sound source, right? So it's therefore the word, and which is in turn connected to the logos, right? But you could just look at it as the source of the pure source of thought. Okay. So again, Herbert Spencer finds himself, you know, paralleling the ancient wisdom teachings, which delights HPB because she often brings it forward when she finds that in her world of late 19th century thought. So onwards, if we could get a reader for this, please.
Scott, can you read that for us, please?
Sure. Parabram, the one reality, the absolute, is the field of absolute consciousness, i.e., that essence which is out of all relation to conditioned existence, and of which conscious existence is a conditioned symbol. But once we pass in thought from this to us absolute negation, duality supervenes in the contrast of spirit or consciousness and matter, subject and object. Spirit or consciousness and matter are, however, to be regarded not as independent realities, but as the two facets or aspects of the absolute, Parabrahman, which constitute the basis of conditioned being, whether subjective or objective.
So here we are again, right? The two facets of the absolute. That's when I would put my question mark. You know, how can you have facets of an absolute, right? But I think there's something that goes a little deeper or is a little bit revelatory in her first sentence here. Parabrahm, the one reality, the absolute, is the field of absolute consciousness. And then, for example, that essence, which is out of all relation to conditioned existence, and of which conscious existence is a conditioned symbol. Okay, and the idea of it being the field of absolute consciousness is a further thought. Just wanted to point that out. Just what that means is still, you know, not completely crystal clear, but it does give us a statement as to the relationship between this homogeneous state of that we're calling the absolute and this concept of absolute consciousness, which is equated with the great breath and cosmic ideation. All right. The teaching that the absolute is, quote, out of all relation to conditioned existence is the fundamental tenet of esoteric philosophy concerning manifestation. It's a hard one to wrap your head around, but you have to recognize that if, you know, across the board, no matter where you go in esoteric thought, you'll find that this quality, no, you can't use the word quality, this beingness, this absoluteness is completely out of a cause and effect relationship with manifestation of any type, that it is not causal to manifestation. It stands completely separate from that. And all we get in terms of the relationship in the statement just read is that duality supervenes in the contrast of spirit and matter. It's, you know, we can only assume that the germ, the central point that characterizes the first logos, is self-arising. Is not caused by the absolute, but is somehow self-arising, thus initiating noumenal duality at its most subjective levels. This is difficult stuff, folks, and the reason is because we don't have direct experience of it. But nonetheless, we're chipping away. We're getting into a little better understanding. Okay, any thoughts at this point? Any ideas?
I don't see any.
Okay, let's go ahead. I think it's all going to come clear or not, but there is more information. So can we get a reader for this paragraph?
Michael, can you read for us, please? You're self-muted. There, thanks.
Considering this metaphysical triad as the root from which proceeds all manifestation, the great breath assumes the character of pre-cosmic ideation. It is the fons et origo, source and origin, of force and of all individual consciousness, and supplies the guiding intelligence in the vast scheme of cosmic evolution. On the other hand, pre-cosmic root substance, mola prakriti, is that aspect of the absolute which underlies all the objective planes of nature. Just as pre-cosmic ideation is the root of all individual consciousness, so pre-cosmic substance is the substratum of matter in the various grades of its differentiation.
You know, so once we move into this duality, you're going to find that it's really much easier philosophically to gain awareness of the ideas presented, right? Because we live in a dualistic world, so it all starts to make sense, right? So we have another new concept, pre-cosmic substance. Right? We've been introduced to pre-cosmic ideation, but now we're into, we move into this level of the second logos, which is pre-cosmic substance. So this gives us a metaphysical triad, Proem, the absolute, which stands above and inherently disconnected from the second and third concepts, which are cosmic ideation and cosmic breath. Actually, what I just said is not how she presents it. She says that the first and second, Proem, the absolute, and cosmic ideation, or the great breath, are the one, and that through cosmic substance manifestation occurs. But that's the metaphysical triad here. Okay. All right, I'm hoping this is going to help. I went back to the Secret Doctrine and through the Theosophical Glossary and pulled up all the terms, and not even all the terms, so especially of the absolute abstract space. There were twice as many, but they were repetitive. These describe it from different angles, or what I found to be the best descriptors of. So you have the absolute on the left side there, and then you have the one attribute that is considered to be a part of the absolute, described in the second column, which is absolute abstract motion. And finally, you know, by everybody's understanding, separate and definitely a part of the beginning of a Manvantara, you have the third quality, which is cosmic substance. So I think it would be useful to read this just to get a sense of what's being described. So could we get an intrepid reader for this, this list, please?
Eva, can you do that for us, please? Yourself.
Ah, it's Eva. The bottle stopped on you, Eva.
Okay, what would you like me to read?
Just
the
read
list
it. Just read the list. Yeah, read all the lists, but start on the left. And
Start
actually,
on the left.
Start on the left, and we'll stop at the end of the list and see if there's any comments. Let's start with that.
Okay. So absolute abstract space. I guess these are synonyms. Sat,
You can say.
Venus, Para Brahman, Night of Brahma, Brahma, neuter, the unmanifested, the dark mystery of non-being, absolute negation, the deep, abstract waters of space, space, the eternal anupadaka, the unconditioned mukta, cosmos in eternity, the noumenon, infinite cosmic space, limitless ever-present space, absolute eternal infinite all, the omnipresent unity, divine unity, divine essence, the ever incognizable deity, unknown essence, the one infinite and unknown essence, abstract, ever incognizable presence, the mundane egg, I just said that, the one circle, the one life, the one self-existing reality, the ever-present eternal abstraction, the causeless cause, secondless reality, undecaying supreme root, omnipresent, eternal, boundless, and immutable principle.
Thank you. So, did this bring any ideas or questions forward? These are all names for this same non-phenomena, which can be described equally by any of these. For instance, I have at the top absolute abstract space, but you could take any one of these and put it at the top of the column, right? The reason I use that is because you have it in juxtaposition to absolute abstract motion, space and motion on the next column. So does this bring anything up for anyone?
Hold on, we got a comment here. Oh, Susan says, great compilation, thanks.
You know, I would just say that from all these very high level essences, I guess, it really underscores the fact that space is not empty. Even though we think of it as just space, it's really not empty if it's got divine essence, if it's the unknown essence, if it's the one life, it's not empty. And I think that's all these different words kind of bring that home.
Yeah, you know, DK has some great one-liners. Among my favorites are, you know, indigo is the, what is it? Indigo is the goal of endeavor, right? And one of those one-liners that really sets you on your ear is space is an entity.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's really like a Zen koan. If you really try to grasp that, to move into that, it's going to change you. The idea that, you know, another way of saying it is the one in whom we live and move and have our being. Because, you know, you can easily say, yeah, well, that's space. But it's the entity in whom we live and move and have our being, which is a deeply moving concept, right? A reality, I should say. Yeah, thank you, Eva. That's, yeah.
Francis?
Yes.
One word always arrests my attention, and it is the word immutable.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, we have the essence of the great paradox here. Heraclitus says there's nothing constant but change. And we have the idea of a principle in which all essential change is impossible. So to make the bridge between the immutability of the only principle that is, and there's nothing else, nothing that can cause mutation. It has to be a self-evolving, mutation, to the idea of infinite mutation. That's the paradoxical bridge that we have to cross. And it's a tough cross, because the mind is not constituted, our mind at present, to fathom such a thing. As a matter of fact, I don't want to get into it too much, but I've figured that any finite being, any universal logos, basically, when compared, if one can, to this absoluteness in its infinite mode, is just the tiniest possible thing, and cannot really embrace or fathom what is going on in this post-proliac world. I'll call it just that. So anyway, I fixate on the word immutable, and I try to make it make sense.
I think there's a real key there in understanding. I'm really glad you brought that up. So the question then becomes, what HBB is by inference saying is that absolute abstract motion is a part of that immutability. And if you can embrace that, then you can live with her definition. If you can't, then you can't. Then it stands outside that line, right? And that just comes to, what is the nature of this absolute abstract motion? As to your other point, which I really appreciate, is even the highest infinite level of consciousness stands as like a mote of dust compared to the other side of the line, which is this, what's described by all these on the left, in the left column here. And I think that's a really good comment, that it's as though everything in prolaic or Manvataric existence is, it's a tiny part of infinite potential or infinite possibilities in comparison to that which embraces all of them somehow. And I think it's, to follow that line that you were pointing out, you have to include undecaying in this immutability. Because it's a changeless.
Well, the paradox presented is that change is impossible and there's nothing but change. So,
that's it.
Okay,
that's it.
One has to work on that, and if one doesn't lose one's mind in the process, or maybe one has to, we might just get it,
So, I guess a question you could ask this question, which is, if you stand in a causal, to that which stands causal to change, can it be changeless?
Well, okay, we could get into this, but I feel that it might lead astray. You see, the causal, it's not really causal, is it? It's self-becoming, and I think they have a what's this, Svabhava? Is that it? It's self-becoming. It's not so much a cause, because it's just an extension of what is, and a reduction. I mean, I've asked myself, is there any kind of motion except reduction? But this gets into a lot of stuff, and sometime, okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Michael. You could see this is an infinite field of inquiry, but Michael brings forward something which I think is very useful, which you could take. Notice that there are themes in this list on the left. For instance, the idea of darkness and the deep and mystery, right? That's one theme. And abstract waters, seems to be the deep and the abstract waters. That's one theme that's brought forth, And then the idea of non-being and night is another concept. And if you look through it, you'll see that there's that there are certain repeated themes that are descriptive, right? And they didn't necessarily occur. They didn't occur in this order, which is one of the reasons I just felt finally, after reading so many descriptions of this concept, I really felt it was necessary to try to get some synthesis of the concept of synthesis. So anyway, let's move on.
Just a couple of comments, if you don't mind, since my mic is still on. So I'm also struck by the words like ever-present, eternity, eternal. There's a few other words. Basically, it's unchanging and it'll never change. Like the word immutable really means finality, irreversible. Everything will reduce, as it used Michael's word, reduce till it's still within this deep, within this space. So it never changes. Everything else that's within it does, but it does not.
Yeah. I'm always reminded of this wonderful comment made by Joe Campbell when asked about infinity. And he said, infinity is not a long time. Infinity has nothing to do with time. Infinity stands entirely outside of the realm of time. And I think that's one of the things that's being described with all of these, this omnipresent, eternal, infinite, ever-present. These are all suggesting that which, stands completely beyond time. And hey, time is, we know it, is something that gets modified real quickly, even just when you die and you move into, those realms, those planes immediately beyond physical realm. Time gets completely starts changing, So it's no stretch of the imagination to see, that where time is not relevant. Another one is limitless. This idea of the concept of boundary or enclosure is irrelevant. Is another concept that we see here, which also is an aspect of the term abstract, because when something is abstracted, it takes it beyond its limitation, right? So, any other thoughts?
We have a couple of thoughts here from Ash. She says, I like the word beyond, or what Shiva represents, that which is not.
Yeah, one of the ways, like when we get into the Secret Doctrine itself, or the Stanzas of Dzyan, the first stanza is just all negatives, all neti. It's not this, it's not that. This hasn't happened. There is no positive description because there is nothing to positively describe. So yeah.
And then she also goes on to say, I also think of space as part of creation and hence not a part of absolute.
Well, that's a different kind of space. or it's not really other than that other space, but it's not the space of the scientists, you know, the space that has X number of particles per square mile, etc. It's not that space that's being described. And yet, it is the, you could say, the body of that being, you know. So that's where space as an entity comes in. Right?
Francis?
Yeah.
I think the great value of all of this, first of all, in one way, to name, you know, to posit these names is a futile attempt, but it does really stimulate the abstract mind and helps to build the antikarana. And it's an exercise which connects us with our higher faculties. We're never going to embrace this thing with human words, you know, or this non-thing. But it has its purpose, and it does, it is evolutionary, for sure. One of the things I like very much is the second-less reality. That's it, you know, the one without a second. When I had a book translated into German, and they made it a literal second of time, but that's not what it means. There's just nothing else. That's it. Yeah. And that's why it's out of all relation with anything, because it is everything. So, you know, it does something to the triadal mind. It does something to pure reason. When we engage in this kind of speculation, we're never going to lasso this. It just can't be done. It's boundless. But it does really increase the power of apprehension. And that, I think, is the great value there.
I agree totally. The original definition of a proem, which is given in the kind of introduction to the Secret Doctrine, is that it is that which stimulates the intuition. A proem in ancient times was that which stimulates the intuition. So it is a preparation for the content. So, you know, it's like, you know, you massage your consciousness into a place that it can receive the transmission when you actually get to the main event, right, which is the stanzas of Dzyan. And that's what this is all about. So I think you're spot on with your assessment of this. Yeah. It's humorous, you know, the idea of lassoing this, you know, then if you did lasso it, then it would be inside the lasso, right?
Yeah,
which
and
would
something
then
else is outside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other comments before we go to
Yes.
next list? Okay.
Yes. Asha continues to say, in reference to what Michael said earlier, and yes, one has to lose the mind when you're talking about this. And she says, as Tuia says, to get beheaded. So she says we all need to get guillotined.
Right. Or guillotined.
Guillotined.
Yeah, guillotine. Instead of guillotine, maybe guillotined would be.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah. And then she goes on to say, perhaps silence is where we will find the answer. And thank you for the stimulating exercise.
Yeah. Welcome. This is you know, the fact that you're here suggests that it represents a certain joy which leads to bliss, to contemplate this, you know, and to more than just a kind of lower mind contemplation, that you can start to make the connection to, you know, the source as it is for you, you know, and that is the bliss of the spirit realm, or the spirit pursuit, I should say. Anyone else before we take on the second list?
No, if that's all I've got right now.
Okay. Eva, are you up for a continued read?
Oh, yeah. As a matter of fact, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking. Can you imagine? I'm thinking. Okay, so
I can imagine that. And just read the second list, not the third.
Right. Absolute abstract motion. Chit, Chaitanya, Mahat, Mahabhuti, the great breath, eternal ceaseless motion, an arcane, living or moving fire, pre-cosmic ideation, absolute unconditioned consciousness, universal mind, pure noumenon of thought, immutable divine thought, the universal world soul.
Thank you. Okay. So, according to Blavatsky, this list describes that which is the one attribute of the list on the left of absolute abstract space, that it is not a further development or a further movement towards manifestation in her philosophy or in the philosophy she is expounding here, but it is part and parcel with the what you could call the causeless cause. Okay, so just keep that in mind as we think about this. So again, we can divide this into focuses. One of them being clearly the idea of divine thought, right? The whole idea of consciousness, universal mind, divine thought, the noumenon of thought, that's one whole idea, right? And that is also in a Mahat. That's what that means too, right? And then we have this other idea presented, which is evidently the same idea, which is eternal ceaseless motion and the great breath, and even a living or moving fire, I think belongs to that, right? And then we have the universal world soul, but also you can connect that with thought, just in the nature of where soul arises as the son of mind and the realm of the higher mental plane, etc. Though we're way beyond that in this list, right? So 2 or 3 concepts repeated, right? Not as many names for this idea of absolute abstract motion, right? So, given that, does anybody have any thoughts about this?
Yes.
Or if you'd like to contrast it to this other list we just finished. Yes, Eva.
Yes. So we in this particular presentation, we cannot, I don't think, look at Chit as representing second aspect, because of the fact that, well, Chit by itself is a reduction of what we use as chitta, which is mind stuff, which refers to the mind, and we know that soul is the son of mind. So there has to be something to do with thought, with mind, even though we call it soul and it's the middle principle. And here the appellations for this absolute abstract motion refer to mind, universal mind, immutable divine thought, pure noumenon of thought. So there is the whole idea here of mind and consciousness sort of intertwined. Even the idea of Maha and Buddhi, which we call Buddhi Manas, I guess, there's that combination. So I don't think it's purely second aspect as we have been taught second aspect.
No, I don't either. Well, first of all, this is a cosmic list, and as HPB describes it, it is one with the absolute abstract space or pure beingness, right? So it's certainly not what we normally think of as an aspect, and certainly not the second principle, not as it's being described. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. I think one link that we can quickly make is the link between motion and the great breath and mind or ideation, because we can easily see motion in thought, right? Because you have, in the same way that you have ceaseless motion, right? You can have immutable, there's that word again, thought. They're related in the idea that ceaseless, in a sense, ceaseless motion or eternal motion, again, takes motion out of the realm of movement as we normally think of it. And immutable thought also moves thought beyond that realm of change. They seem to me like, what do they call it, a praxis, these opposite concepts, described in the same frame. Like thought, everything I know about thought suggests anything but immutability, right?
Right.
And the same, we have that same problem, though, maybe not is apparent in eternal motion. Because again, you've got to take this idea of eternity out of it being just a long, long time. It stands outside of time. Therefore, we're suggesting that motion here stands outside of what we normally think of as movement. That doesn't mean I know what it is. I'm just looking at the descriptors and what it's suggesting here.
It's ceaseless motion. It's not even motion. It's ceaseless motion.
Yeah, both suggesting the same thing, eternal and ceaseless, suggesting that the motion that's taking place is outside the paradigm of time and space, which is the only means by which we have to measure motion. You know what? Time has crept up on us, folks. We are here at 7 minutes to 3, and I'd like to keep this close in because I know people either have to go to bed or go to work or whatever. So we're going to have to pull the plug before we can take on cosmic substance. So this is where we'll start next time. I've really enjoyed your feedback during this webinar, and thank you all so much for attending. And we will see you again on the 3rd Sunday of July, which, do you have a date quick in hand, BL? Do we know what that is?
Yeah. Hold on just one second. July is the 15th.
Okay, July 15th. And keep in mind that this, a lot of these webinars start at 8 o'clock GMT, but that basically for the benefit of those who live east of the GMT time zone, we're pulling it back to 7 o'clock GMT, and that's going to be the ongoing time. So, okay, until then, thank you again, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Francis.
Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.